And we are live here from the digital floor of Exalted Funeral Con. This my name is Tony Vicenda. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP. We're hosting the main stage of events here at Exalted Funeral. What does that mean for digital convention? It means that we're in this room all weekend long, and that we have all of the panels being hosted in this room are going out live on stream over at Plus One. Andre, I may have you mute your microphone just to take care of background noise when you're not talking. But whenever you're talking, just remember to unmute yourself. Thanks, buddy. We have a great set of panelists who are going to be talking this morning about maximum minimalism. What is that? It's a term I made up for a lot of my favorite games as I put this panel together based on some of the people who were like, I'd love to do something. And these are some of my favorite designers. We regretfully, Mamedos, the creator of Arc, was going to be joining us this morning. They were not feeling well, and so they were unable to. They regretfully are not. But if you are going to Gen Con in a couple weeks here in the U.S., you will be able to see them there. Hopefully, if they're better, because they received the Diana Jones Award. So that's something I'm looking forward to. But they were not able to join us this morning. They may be poking around later on this weekend, and we'll make sure we get Mamedos back on to have a similar conversation soon. We were really glad to have them on the panel, and unfortunately they won't be able to join us. If that's the only reason you showed up this morning, well, I'm glad you're here anyways. With that said, let's meet some of our other panelists for this morning. I've got a little bit of an intro question that I'm going to have each of you answer as we go across also too. And I don't know how everybody else sees everybody. I mean, I know how the audience live does, but I don't know how y'all see each other. But we're basically going to work our way across the speakers. So that'll be Matt and then Andre and then Marcus. And then sometimes we'll hop around as we go. But as you introduce yourself, just tell us a little bit about who you are, the work that you do, and then tell us a little bit about your favorite minimalist game that you have played. Like, what's one of the minimalist games that you've played that made you go like, oh man, I really love this style of play for the first time? Let's start with you, Matt.
Sure. So I'm here today talking about my work that I publish under the name Sealed Library. Most of the stuff that I do is about deconstructing the processes we go through, particularly as games masters, and kind of reallocating the power in those throughout the group or to other aspects of the game. And I think probably my favorite minimalist game actually, I think, is Mouse Ritter, which is cool. Especially, and I'm not just saying that because Andre's here, like who publishes it, but that like really, as a box set and as a game for me, is a good like example of what a minimalist game can be like as a product and as a game.
Awesome, beautiful. Let's go over to Andre. publisher of Mouse Ritter over at Games Omnivorous. Andre, why don't you tell people a little about who you are, what you do, and your favorite minimalist game?
Thanks so much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Tony, and Matt, and Marcus, obviously, and everyone at Exalted Funeral this con. I'm also I'm sorry that Momitos couldn't be here. I was looking forward to talking to her, but well, I'm pretty sure another opportunity will arise in the future. So my name is Andre. I'm the publisher behind. I'm the person behind the publisher Games Omnivorous from Portugal. And yeah, as Matt said, our most successful game is Mouse Ritter, and I think that my favorite minimalist game is I'm probably going to go with a very minimalist design. And we can discuss what minimalism is in a bit, but I think it's going to be either lasers and feelings or tunnel goons. Awesome. One of the two.
Great options, right?
Yeah, those are Sweet. When I think of minimalism, that's mostly what I usually think about. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. We'll pop over to Marcus. Marcus, same questions.
Hey everyone. Thanks for having me, Tony. I feel honored just being here talking to you people. So I'm Apes of Wrath RPG on Twitter, and I'm pretty much a newcomer, I would say. I've been playing RPGs for heck of a long time, but I did this thing called Down We Go, a minimalist game. It started out as an experiment of my own to see if I could fit an entire game with character sheet on an A5 page. And I think I did. And Tony seemed to think so too. So now with the help of Tony, we are developing this game. And it's going off to the printers, hopefully pretty soon.
Hopefully at the beginning of the month after community reviews. So
yeah,
pre-sales close this week, and you can go to ttrpg.link /DWG live to get a late pledge in over on GameFound. But yeah, beginning of next month, it should go to the printer.
And favorite minimalist game? I love Knave. I also love Lasers and Feelings, and I love Tunnel Goons too. Those are the 3 ones I had written down before this. So awesome. Yeah.
Sweet. I love it. Like I said, super excited to have all of y'all. And Marcus just mentioned like Down We Go. A thing I did with Down We Go is Marcus was like, here's a beautiful half-page game. And I was like, great. Let's make it 80 pages. The kind of expanding, the growing, the presentation. And I think I'll speak to one of the reasons we were so excited to have made us on here, Arc and a lot of the other games, I think, especially when I think of Games Omnivorous, Games Omnivorous presents not only minimalist games, but beautifully presented games. The art, the packaging, everything I've ever got. I think 17th Century Minimalist was the first thing I picked up from y'all. It's always a pleasure to open up a game. Sealed Library has a really well-defined visual aesthetic that kind of hallmarks all of the games that y'all create. Also, their Arc itself, the game with very direct, elegant, interlocking mechanics. They're very simple. They're not complicated. There's not a lot of them. It's easy to teach the game quickly. But Mamedo's visual style, the fact that there are spreads in the book given over to a giant koi fish and small people swimming around it, right? Like the constant visual interpretation around it. I think we're seeing a lot in the minimalist design movement. Not necessarily a minimalism in presentation, but a real consideration of how information design comes up. So we're going to talk about some of that also, too, as we go through a couple different pieces today. But again, if you have questions, I want y'all to feel free to type them in the chat. Feel free to have a conversation alongside if you want to. Again, we will have the opportunity either in chat or if you want to come up later and ask questions, you'll be able to ask questions. Two, feel free to populate those whenever you want, and we'll work through them as we can. But let's just start with a few kind of simple conversations, and possibly the worst question that ever gets asked. Andre runs the Minimalist RPG Design Facebook group, and at least once every 2 to 3 months, this question will rear its ugly head. But what is minimalist game design? Like, what does that mean? What is a minimalist game? In your opinion? We're going to go across this time. If you don't have something you want to say, but we can also pop around in the future. Not everybody has to have an answer to everything. So if you don't have an answer, just say, I don't know. But Matt, any thoughts on how you would define minimalist RPG design?
Well, in the spirit of the panel, I'll try and keep my answer relatively short because this could get long. So for me, I think a lot of like traditional RPGs are really, really focused on process, right? They have really complex mechanics and they're interested in those mechanics as a process, as well as the product of those mechanics, which is fiction, right? I think minimalist games tend to do the opposite. They tend to say, right, we're really interested in the product of these mechanics and getting as much product out of as little process as possible. And so they pare down these mechanical processes while trying to maximize the output as fiction.
I love that. Andre, anything you specifically want to add to that?
Yeah, it's as you said, Tony, this question arises every now and then in multiple forums, not only on the Facebook group, but I see it in other places as well. And it's a very subjective thing, right? I suspect that for a lot of people, minimalism is kind of the equivalent to rules light in a way. I think there is a lot of people who perceive a minimalist game basically as a rules light game. So maybe a game like Dungeon Crawl Classics, for instance, could be perceived as minimalist in that regard. I'm not sure that a game like DCC is minimalist for me, but I know that that there are some people who think so. Then there's I think there's some other folks that consider minimalism consider a game to be minimalist when the rules can be condensed in like a single sheet, basically a single cheat sheet, basically. This would be the case, for instance, with Electric Bastionland, right, where there's a 300-page book, but the rules could be condensed in just a single page. Or as Marcus just said, Down We Go is an A5 rules page. Basically, the rules is an A5 page, and then you have like a book built on top of that. And there's obviously other forms of minimalism or ultra minimalism, and that's for instance Tunnel Goons or Lasers and Feelings, where the entire game is just one spread basically, and then you kind of improvise on top of that. I think it's very subjective what a minimalism game is, or how it can be qualified. In my opinion, I've been thinking about this for a long time now, and in my opinion, a minimalist game is a game that requires low preparation. That's kind of where I stand right now. So a game that only requires 5, 10, 15 minutes tops of preparation, and with if you prepare, if you're able to prepare a gaming session in 5-10 minutes with the rules or the tools that the game offers, I tend to conceive that game as minimalist. And so when I'm in the process of designing games or conceptualizing or helping to conceptualize games with other people that are authors at Games Omnivorous, I normally tend to think along those lines. So I tend to think of games that require very low prep. And I think that the best example so far that we've published is Mouse Ritter. So you have a game that is presented in 2 box sets that are very maximalist in terms of their presentation, in terms of their art, in terms of what they offer, the components, everything. But the adventures, the modules that are there, you could probably not even prepare if you know the rules well enough. You don't even need to prepare. You can just run them basically off the bat. And that's right now, it's normally when I think about minimalism, I think about it in these terms. That's what I would
That's the first time I've heard that take. That like I love that kind of concept of how long does it take the GM to get going. Sasha over in the chat said, "Love Mouse Ritter ran it 30 minutes after opening the book." Right. So not even just session prep, but the ability to take in the rules and just run the game in that short period of time is huge.
And that's exactly what we tried to do with the estate. If I may add really quick, what we tried to do conceptually there was how can we present basically a campaign that people can play for probably 15 sessions or more without demanding almost any preparation from the DM, and that's something that conceptually I think it's very interesting, and I think we were successful. But I'm obviously biased, but I think we kind of did it. We kind of created a cohesive campaign that can go in multiple directions, that is very player driven, that has clearly defined modules and moments, but that requires almost no preparation from the GM. And I think that conceptually it's interesting. That's where I stand on this. Yeah,
love it. Marcus, how about you? What is minimalism?
I've just recently started thinking about this myself and trying to define this for my own sake. And I actually went and read what you, Andre, wrote in the Minimalist RPG group, and listening to both of you explain this, I really don't have much to add. I would say my definition lands around somewhere near low prep as well. Obviously, it is a subjective term, like both of you said, and but I would like to say, if I can pick up the game, read it myself, 5-10 minutes, and then explain it to another person, without having to go back and look at it, that's minimalism for me. Awesome. Besides that, I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I love it. I will throw out Chris Bissett, who's going to be on the adventure design panel we're doing in a couple of hours. I want to talk about a dragon game real quick, right? Which is a game they did. One of the things that came out, not in a great way, through a bad Twitter conversation at one point in time, was also just the intent behind economy of language. And I think a lot of time for me, minimalism has now defaulted to, is the creator intending to be intentionally economic in some way, shape, or form in the game as a central design pillar? That's for me what has come to design minimalism a lot. And Chris was the one who really set me down from a dragon game thinking about what is the intention for economy of language and design in this? And whether that's 4 pages, 5 pages, however long it might be, I think that's a huge hallmark of, was somebody trying to write a short game? Was somebody trying to make a minimalist game? And I think there's a lot of forms that can take, whether it's 1 page, 2 page, a lot of other things. But yeah, I love that.
In any text, not just a game, but in any text that you might describe as minimalist, I think there's a question of, well, what are they trying to minimalize here, right? And arguably, I think for the three of us here, that's not presentation, right? The presentation is quite maximalist, but the things we're trying to minimize that we've talked about are all process, preparation, time. But somebody else might have a different definition of what they're trying to minimalize. You could look at something like White Hack and talk about that as minimalist, because the presentation is very kind of plain and austere, and that has a different function that's also minimalist, but in a different aspect.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think it's starting to think about those things a little bit more broadly, and where is that economy and minimalism being applied is huge.
Yeah.
Let's ask a little bit better of a question. Like I said earlier, as a community, y'all tend to create really elegant and direct mechanics, but we have that high presentation, high emphasis on presentation, layout, information design. What role would how would y'all connect the role of kind of that visual information presentation and minimalist design, right? I feel like I wrote that question down and I was reading my own writing, and I'm like, I wrote that question horribly. I sent that question to y'all horribly, and I just asked it even worse. What's the connection between information design, layout, and presentation, and minimalist design for the products that y'all make? Andre, let's actually start with you on this one for Games Omnivorous, because I feel like this has been something for y'all from the get-go with some of the different elements you have built up and some of the different pieces that you have that have been really huge. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about how those things meet?
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's a great question, Tony. At the risk of sounding a bit arrogant. I I usually think of Games Omnivorous as actually an arts brand that happens to specialize in games, so not the other way around, right? So this is kind of my mindset into going into conceiving a product or conceiving a game. I tend to think the other way around, right? So I tend to think, okay, I'm doing like I'm doing an artistic output or whatever you want to call it, and it just happens to be a game. So for me, the artistic side of role-playing games is absolutely fundamental in everything I do, and I think that for most, if not all, of the authors that are published by Games Omnivorous. So we experiment a lot with with different formats and mediums, and so the idea of presentation and the idea of seeing RPGs as a form of artistic expression for us is a pillar of what we do. And I think that for the most part, I think that games, generally speaking, games are still, for the most part, are still public. There's a public perception about games that they're a mere form of entertainment, right? I think that publishers like Games Omnivorous and others out there are trying to kind of shatter this barrier and taking games one step forward, right? Just like, just a good example would be comic books, for instance, right? So comic books started like as an entertainment, minor literature, or whatever you want to call it, and now they are high literature, the likes of, I don't know, Alan Moore, or if you go to Belgium, right, comic books are part of the national identity of Belgium. And I think games are going in a similar direction, and that's kind of like my mindset going into game design and conceiving products. And I think that going back to minimalism, I think minimalism is a very good way to pursue this avenue. Let's say it, because when you have a game that is minimal and you don't have to spend, an awful lot of time and pages, and you don't have to ask or to demand of the reader to learn the game very thoroughly, you can start experimenting with formats and other mediums, and you can try to experiment with new things. So like that's what we did, I think, with that Robo Jungle, for instance, where you have a music LP that doubles up as a setting, or you have this little zine that can if people are not gamers necessarily, they can still enjoy it because it kind of comes across as an art zine or a graphic zine or something along those lines. So I think that minimalism also favors this agenda in a way, because it allows us to explore so many other possibilities, and it's a catalyst to cross-reference games with other forms of art, such as music and literature. And so I think this is how I would answer that question.
Awesome, love it. Marcus, how about you? When you were creating Down We Go, like you said, there was a lot of like, hey, can I fit a game on an A5 page? And you did it with art by using good layout. Like, it was very visually captivating. And that was one of the first things that drew me to it. Talk a little bit about the relationship of these things in your mind.
I think for me, since I set these very strict like rules for myself, like from the get-go, I said I have to fit all of this on an A5 page. So that was the mission from the beginning. And since I didn't have a lot of, I started doing the layout for the first version as I was writing. I was writing directly into the layout, and as I was doing this, I had to reduce the language, to boil it down to the very essence of what I was trying to convey, like in terms of what vibe do I want this game to give off. And I think since I had to limit myself so much with the language, I started thinking about like what kind of artwork can I put in here to convey the vibe. Like that old saying, a picture says more than 1,000 words. If I can just put a skull up in the corner, it gives a vibe straight away that I don't have to explain in words. And I also agree with what Andre said here. Like, it really frees you up to start experimenting in different formats. I mean, I didn't do that with Down We Go yet. There may be another version coming out. I don't know. But I think the restraints you put on yourself as a designer really frees you up to like see other avenues this game could go. I don't know.
No, but I also think like we see a lot, and this is true for Down We Go. It's true for Mouse Order. It's true for Mothership. It's true for a lot of the other like games that have a minimalist tag on them. A lot of the times, it also immediately invites other people to start thinking about how they would take this and put it into a different form. So we've already seen 38 Down We Go hacks come out. In the last couple of months since the opening up of the design kit. There's a total like insane flood of Merkborg stuff. There are so many minimalist games that people start to immediately think about format for. I think that's part of one of the really freeing things about it also too. Matt, like I said, one of the things that early on, even as you and I just started interacting online, was the strong visual aesthetic that y'all had for Sealed Library, which you've maintained and refined over the last couple of years, as y'all started putting more products into physical print. Also, what are your thoughts on some of this?
Well, so I think so. Sealed Library was a very deliberate response to what games are like now. So this idea of deconstructing processes and rebuilding them to be more collaborative or decentralized is very deliberate. That's true to the aesthetic as well. The aesthetic, so I don't intend this as derogatory when I say it, but a lot of RPGs are like fancy engineering books. That's their presentation is an engineering book with a lot of visual flourishes. And I wanted to sort of deconstruct that and move away from it a bit. And so things like the deliberate embracing CMYK as the only colors I use, or the main colors I use is about deconstructing the printing process, right?
So for people who don't know, let's go ahead and just break that. Give me the 30 seconds and CYMK. What do you mean, and why does that matter?
Cool. Yeah. So when you send something to a printing house, the colors on the page are generated using a mix of 4 inks: cyan, magenta, yellow, and chroma. Chroma being black that they add to darken colors or to print entirely in black. And whatever color you see on the page is generally speaking made up of those 4 inks. And so I deliberately kind of feature those colors strongly as like a deliberate deconstruction of what printing looks like. The process of printing is deconstructed in the visual. The same, I've done things where we've done collage of public domain works, or the inspiration we've looked at has been things like illuminated manuscripts by monks from the 15th century and punk zines from the 70s at the same time. So again, it's about a deconstruction of like existing visual formats and mashing them together in new ways. And there's some things that are consistent through that, and then there's some things that we've experimented with, or I've got to do layout or art for me experiment with. But there's a clear response there. It's a deliberate response to deconstructing these fancy engineering books and making them into something else.
I love it. I also love it thinking about some of the stuff you dropped this week, which is literally has some deconstructed elements in it in a very direct way. So
yeah, exactly. Well, in there, that's what I mean about letting somebody who I've worked with take it and run with it, because for Goblins and Gardens, doing the cover for What on the Borderware, it's literally collage from an old D&D text, and that's exactly what it is. It's been deconstructed and put back together to make something new.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about some of the strengths of minimalist design, and that can be from the design process standpoint, the play standpoint, whatever standpoint you want to take it from. But let's talk about some of the things that make minimalist design attractive and an enjoyable space or a hearty space to design in for y'all. So, Marcus, let's start with you since you have a chance to lead off. What do you see as some of the strengths of minimalist design?
Well, since Down We Go is my only like experience with this, I'll talk about Down We Go. But what I realized and what you helped me realize and find is, like, by scaling down everything, boiling everything down, new things emerged that I wasn't aware of when I started. Like this whole narrative thing, the way the ref asks questions to the players. I didn't know about that when I started the game, but as we started playtesting it and I started writing like adventures for it, and I think the reason I discovered that with your help, of course, is that we removed so much to make this visible. It was there. I just couldn't see it at first. So that would be one of the strengths. Like by removing things, other things can emerge.
Awesome. Matt, same question.
So I think big books, whether that's adventures or rule sets, they create this very, very difficult information design problem where you have a great deal of information dependency. Oh, okay, I want to play a wizard. That means I need this information from page 27 and this other chapter that's page 125 to 140. And then I need to look up something that's on page 345 to understand what this does. And you have the more information you have, you get this exponentially growing number of links between more pieces of information that by definition have to be further apart as it gets bigger. And when you shrink the game, that information dependency becomes easier. The act of learning it becomes easier. The act of referencing it becomes easier. And so it gets out of the way. You can internalize everything you need to know to play the game rather than relying on this heavy reference text a lot of the time. So I think minimalism kind of breaks things down to a size that people can actually internalize all of individually.
Awesome. Love it. Andre, same to you.
Yes. So I think for me there are fundamentally three strengths to minimalism design in games, and two of them we already talked about. So I won't go back to them. I'll just mention them briefly, which is low preparation. I think that's a very that's one of the strongest benefits of minimalism design. So as I said, going back to stuff that we publish. So with Mouse Ritter, for instance, the estate, you have like a campaign that requires like a 15 session campaign potentially that requires virtually almost no preparation from the DM. I think that's a strength. Or if you want to, take Undying Sands as an example, the idea, the concept behind that product was how can we create a flavorful and meaningful and immersive setting without it being presented as a book essentially, and how can we create this setting that requires almost no preparation or very low preparation from the DM as well. So I think that's one of the benefits or strengths of minimalism. The second one, I think it's what we talked about earlier, is I see minimalism as a doorway to explore connections between games and other forms of art, and that's what we did with that Robo Jungle or Putrescence Regnant collaboration with Mörkborg after that Robo Jungle, and there are still other things going on in development that I cannot talk about yet, but we are coming up with with concepts and products that somehow go in that direction as well. And I think minimalism is a tool in that sense to explore the connections between games and other forms of art. And I think the third strand, as Matt was saying, I think he was spot on with his comment, is the cost of entry, right? I think it all comes down to the cost of entry. So minimalism games, from the viewpoint of players, require a very minimal cost of entry. So it's very easy to play them. I'm not entirely sure that it's super easy to run them, and we can talk about the challenges of Minimalist in a bit. And I think it's sometimes it's not super easy to run them because it requires some experience. But to play them as a player character, minimalist games are very the cost of entry is very low, and I think that's a doorway for more people into the hobby. So that's how I answer this.
Go ahead and lead us into that conversation, because there are challenges. It's not just, hey, minimalist games are great, they're the best. I mean, they may be my favorite type of game to play, but I have a lot of experience to draw on, and that's one of the things you were just hitting. Talk to us about some of the challenges designing or playing in that space.
Yes, I think the biggest challenge, or for me at least, in my opinion, the biggest challenge or the biggest downside to minimalist games is how much I think that overall they require a lot of experience from the person running the game, because there are so many gray design areas, right? So there are some of these gray design areas are excellent that they're there because rules don't need to cover everything, right? They need they are just a guideline to a conversation that is happening at the gaming table. So the gray areas of design are very important, but I also think that for a lot of people they are a challenge. For a lot of game masters, they become a challenge. And I think minimalism design requires sometimes a lot of improvisation that, maybe it's not to everyone's liking. And sometimes I think that people can have bad experience with minimalist games because they hit a spot in the fiction or in the narrative that they don't quite know what to do, and they don't have the tools to deal with it in the best way or to their liking. And sometimes it can be a challenge, and that's one of the aspects that myself and the people I work with, the authors I work with at Games of Universe, we try to minimize that, and we try to stand ourselves in as if we were one such game master, and try to see what the problems could be and how can we overcome it, and how can we help the person running the game as much as we can. But I think that's definitely a challenge of minimalist design, I would say.
As much as rulings, not rules, tends to be a hallmark of old school design, and minimalist design, you basically depend on the GM and the table to fill in a lot of those spots. Matt, your work, especially with the deconstructive parts, addresses some of that. But I mean, as far as a lot of times you're taking tools and saying, hey, we're gonna intentionally play around in that space. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, but also generally, what are some of the challenges that you see?
Well, I think a challenge that's much less to do with kind of the art of minimalist games is actually in selling them. I think that really, really minimalist stuff can wind up so physically small that it's actually harder to get it into and get people to understand what it is. I think Ark is a good example of this, and it's a shame.
Hold on just a second, Matt. Andre, will you mute again for me?
Tell me?
Will you mute again?
Sorry.
You're good. All right, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
So Ark, as it is sold now, it's a hardback book with a spine that can go on a shelf, and it's easy to see and easy to display, and therefore easy to get people to pick it up and look at it. But if you go back and look at Ark in its original format, like the zine format, once you hit this small, I think it's really hard for us to get on shelves in physical spaces and show people what the game is, because it's shrunk almost to the point where it lacks visibility. And I think that's a challenge. And actually, Andre is a good example of this, who does really clever things with that. Undying Sands is definitely minimalist, but it's such a clever presentation that it solves that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, Sasha again in the chat said Mothership 0E to First E is another great example of this, going from the individual zines to the box set. Boxes is easier to put on a shelf. We hear this a lot, like the pushback on no spines for zines. We're seeing a lot more reflows who just realize, hey, you know, you can turn this sideways and you can see the front cover of it, and you can stack them deep rather than side by side and take up. We're seeing that start to happen, but it still is a challenge. And it also brings the question sometimes from backers or other people, what am I even buying here, right? Like, of just, especially for those games where the pages are like Down We Go, a half page or other things like that. Like, what am I buying becomes a question. I don't think it's a good question extensively, but it is a question that comes up a lot and we have to be prepared for.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I thank you, Matt and Tony, for this, because I think this is absolutely spot on, and I had never thought about it in these terms. But I think that one of the tasks, or one of the things that we've been doing at Games of New Year is precisely that: is how can you do minimalist design, being it more appealing as possible, right? That's kind of like where, so the estate or the Undying Sands, that's exactly right. I had never thought about it in these terms, but it's absolutely spot on.
Yeah. Marcus, how about you? Thoughts on some of the challenges in designing in a minimalist space?
I don't really have anything to add. Both Matt and Andre gave great answers. I hadn't really thought about this either, the things that Matt brings up. But I think, like, if I go to myself, like when I started playing role-playing games, my idea was that a bigger book has to be a better book, right? Because we're kind of conditioned to think like that in other things, not just games. Like a bigger car, more different gears on your bike or whatever. Bigger is better. So yeah, that's definitely one of the challenges minimalist game designers have to face. Like, how do I present my minimalist product in an appealing way to have people pick it up? Yes.
Awesome. Let's talk specifically about limitations, and we're going to open things to the floor for questions. So if you have questions, you want to type them in, this is a great time to do it. If you want to ask them live and be able to talk back and forth a little bit with someone, I'm going to move up onto the stage with the other presenters and let people take up this space so they can ask Q&A directly if they want to. Either one is fine. We'd love to have your questions and be able to talk about them, though. So feel free to go ahead and get those questions ready. It can be as specific or as broad as you want, but I'm sure you all showed up to ask Mamedo's questions, so if you don't have any, that's fine also too. But how do y'all set limitations for yourself in design? What are some of the things that y'all do to say, hey, like, if we're looking to create this economy, if we're looking to have this minimalist focus in some way, shape, or form, what are some of the designs you find yourself really looking at, or what are some of the limitations or impositions, maybe they're not limitations but requirements you put on yourself to help control that process? Let's go with Matt to start out with.
Cool. So for me, in the design process, usually that's pretty organic, and usually it's very catalytic. So like something I released this week, there's things in Then There Hills. You know, that was why I made that up live at a game I ran, and that was really, the design process happened very live, and then really the writing process, where it actually becomes a thing that I publish, is where the constraints come in. And usually there, I set myself right at the start a page budget where I create my empty Google Doc and I put all the page breaks and all the headings in before I do any writing. And I say, okay, this is how big this is. And so like We Sail Beyond, Sealed Library, Have You Heard About the Beast? All those things had a page count before there were any words on the page. And that really works for me to get the structure of something down, where I'm like, okay, this is how big the container is. Now I've got to stuff this game into it.
Awesome. Marcus, I know you talked a lot about it for this, and I know, like, anybody who's wondering, like, yes, Marcus and I have worked on this. I think Marcus designs great games, which is why I wanted to produce it. But a constant conversation in Down We Go was, how does Marcus see it versus how do I see it versus how did a collaborator see it, and what are those guide rails? So I'd love to hear from you on some of your thoughts on how do you create constraints around what you're creating.
Pretty much what Matt said. Like I like for Down We Go, I decided on a page count, which was 1. I decided on a format, which was A5. But I really love the 1-page thing. That's I have a couple of system neutral horror scenarios that are also 1 page on itch, and that's usually how I do it as well. I set up a page count. I do all the, like, name the chapters, do the chapter headers, and then I just fill it. And like if I decide the equipment list is only going to be 1 page, then that's it. So pretty much the same as Matt is doing, I would say.
Andre, for y'all even have some processes within GO for certain types of games that have even more stringent requirements and kind of throw them into some different spaces, as well as it being part of your ethos. Can you talk a little bit about those, and what are some of the other ways you just kind of create constraints around the design you do?
Yes, absolutely. I'm one of those people that absolutely love having constraints, and it's there's a saying, right, that goes, great art thrives under big constraints, right? And I think that also applies to games, because, as I said earlier, I tend to think of games as a form of artistic expression. So yeah, as you said, one of the collections at Games Omnivorous is the Manifestus Omnivorous, right? And it's essentially a set of, well, it's a collection of gaming zines built around the idea of an artistic manifesto. Basically, that's the concept behind the collection, where we present authors with the manifest, basically, which is a set of 10 constraints, and then we let the authors, illustrators, do basically whatever they want with it. And it's just fascinating to see how it is interpreted in such different ways. And it's just some people, ask me why are the rules, why is rule number 6 this, or rule number 7 that? And I normally, what I answer is, the rules don't really matter, right? They're very arbitrary, to say the least, right? What counts is the idea of a shared artistic space, basically. That's what counts there, and the idea that people are giving the exact same constraints to build something utterly different, and I think it's the concept, the experience that counts, and the idea that one of the books by itself is not as important as the collection as a whole, in the idea of creating a shared artistic space. And I think that constraints do that. And I also, in terms of my own process of gaming design, I tend to think in terms. I'm not sure if I'm successful at that, but when I normally sit at my desk to create something, I normally tend to think. I ask myself what has never been attempted before, especially in terms of the physicality of the product and how it feels in your hands. So, Undying Sands is obviously a product of that process, in the sense that it's a setting, right? An RPG setting, but with board game components, and it's a highly visual piece and a lot of emphasis on cartography. The LPs that Robo Jungle is another example, right? So for me, the physicality of the product is where I tend. That's where I I put most of my focus and attention. And it's also a constraint, because in the sense that you have you're trying to limit yourself to how will this product be presented, and how will it how will it feel in the hands of people, and yeah, that's normally what I part of my process, at least.
Awesome. I've got a couple more thoughts, but let's open it up for about 10 to 20 minutes to any questions folks have. I'm going to move up onto the stage. If people want to come up and ask a question, they can. Again, you can just type it into the chat. If no one has questions, that's also okay. I've got a couple more thoughts I'll throw out, but I'd love to invite anybody who wants to feel free to come up and ask a question. You can stand on this orange square that's underneath my avatar right now, and it'll bring you up alongside the speakers so everyone can hear you, or you can just type it into chat if that's what you're most comfortable with.
We've already got a question coming from in chat, Tony.
Yeah. So what has been one of the better experiences? This is from Eric, or opportunities from promoting and publishing minimalist games. So what's been one of your kind of better experiences as you've tried to share a minimalist game, as you're trying to get the word out there, promoting it? I will say, if you're looking for a channel to host a stream on, you should reach out to +1EXP. Just shoot me a message over on Twitter or Discord are the best ways to reach out. Or you can email me at Tony at +1EXP if you want to promote a minimalist game. Marcus literally came on stream to run Down We Go, and like a week later, I was like, Marcus, if you make City Rules, I would love to publish a 20-page-ish version of this book. And now it's not a 20-page-ish version of that book, but if you're looking for help promoting, let me know. But which I may have just taken Marcus's answer, unfortunately. Marcus, any good ideas on how to promote your games or get publishing opportunities for them?
Just put it out there as much as possible. Just like drop all your fears and nervousness. I mean, the community is a very helpful community. I would say it's full of supportive people, and yeah, just put it out there.
Matt, Andre, any thoughts you want to add in on promoting or publishing minimalist games?
Yeah, I'd say go and run them. Go and run them for people, and go and run them for people who are new to RPGs. Now, a good friend of mine here, the first RPG I ran for him was Brindlewood Bay, which, tiny booklet, A4 mystery sheet. And one of the things he said to me is that blew his mind, because at that point, the only RPG he owned was The One Ring. Great big hardback. And he just did not realize RPGs could be so small. And now he loves Troika. He's played Brindlewood a few times. He's played a bunch of weird other small stuff with me, and he's really got into that kind of indie side of RPGs. And he literally did not know it existed until I ran it for him. And so I think the best way you can do this is go out and just show it to people physically and show them how it works. And then some people will latch onto it.
Awesome. Jason Cordova, the creator of Brindlewood, is also going to be in the adventure design panel with Chris right after this one at 10 o'clock. I was going to throw out the Gauntlet as an online community of play, that if you don't have people near you to run your game with, go running games on the Gauntlet is a play space I will always also endorse. It's a great way to connect with other players if you don't have people near you to play with. Andre, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just gonna I absolutely agree with what everyone said. I'm just gonna add that, at least from my experience, when as I said, when we try at Games Omniverse to do a minimalist game or a minimalist design, we think very much as I was saying, to the connections to other forms of art, such as music, as we did with the LPs, or literature, or multiple forms of art. And I think one good opportunity that arises from that is that you can somehow penetrate other audiences, right? So this happened with That Robo Jungle. So we sold the record to a lot of people that are not gamers, basically. They just wanted to enjoy the music, right? Or we sold the Insectiary, for instance, which is a little bestiary with with lots of insect art, and we sold that to non-gamers because it, you know, the book itself looks nice, you know, and people just like to look at the art. You know, obviously I'm biased, but I think that minimalism also is a means to reach other audiences, especially if you're experimenting with other formats. That's what I would say.
I actually think I've had a success story with exactly what Andre is talking about recently. A guy I worked with who's based in India and is writing a solo journaling RPG. And I was talking to him about how he could get it out there. And we talked about, I'll call it like global options, you know, like itch and drive through. But I also said, you should go out and find some artists and writers communities based where you are and talk to them. And actually, he's been accepted for a residency at an art gallery where his game is going to be presented as interactive fiction. And they are going to print copies of the game and it's going to be exhibited and people can come and experience it at the gallery alongside things like musical art installations or video. And that's like a real, for him, I don't think he expected to ever have a local audience, and now he does.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I'll throw out the same thing. Lots of my friends who are Jewish game designers will speak to their local synagogue, Jewish community centers, other stuff like that whenever they have games out, not because the people in their like circles play games, but because that community has an investment in lots of times the subject matter or something else happening in it. When I created Beards and Beyond, a very hairy RPG, I posted out about it in beard groups and had a lot of people who had never played games before who were really excited, or who had played Dungeons and Dragons when they were teenagers, but nothing since then, about the game. So thinking about the other people who may be interested in your game is huge. We're going to kick it over to Colin. Colin, if you want to unmute yourself, ask your question. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think this is picking up on the previous discussion, but it's about how do you walk the line between rules minimalism and implied knowledge of the GM? Like, where do you leave the GM to fill in the blanks, and where do you to write that down specifically?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We talked about that, and it's probably one of the most common critiques that will come up, that minimalist games are only able to be minimalist because they don't explain all the things you should have to explain for a game, which I think there's a give and take on. But how have each of you sort of sought to kind of walk that line or explore that space?
I can try to answer if that's okay. Yeah,
please.
Yeah, it's well, for me it comes down to what we discussed previously on the challenges, right? So minimalist games somehow, in my perspective, and I see this, you know, I see this comment fairly often, is that, you know, it demands a certain experience from the GM, because you are going to have to improvise a lot and come up with solutions on the spot that the game does not contemplate. So I think that's obviously a challenge. And when we try to, at least myself and the people we work with here at Games Omnivorous, we always try to put ourselves on that spot. And, you know, is this contemplated enough? How is this? You know, how can you do this best? But it's not. I don't have necessarily a process for that. It's mostly based on instinct, right? Okay, let's leave this out. Let's. It's a question of how do you think the game will be played, and you try to cover as much as possible without the game having more than, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 pages of rules. That's mostly where that's normally how I tend to think when I'm doing games.
Awesome.
I think for me, it's about trying to be explicit about that. If it is not contained in the game, it probably doesn't matter, and the answer you come up with is good enough, and that the process of coming up with it is a huge part of what the game is about, right? It's about coming up with those answers and enjoying doing so, and it doesn't really matter if you get it wrong. Like, you don't need to have that experience. Like earlier, we talked about how a lot of people feel like they need to have a lot of experience to run a minimalist game. I would argue the best way to gain that experience is to play minimalist games and get them wrong, to make those mistakes and say, shit, I don't know what to do here.
Wrong.
How are we going to resolve this situation? And you talk about it a bit, and maybe your first answer isn't good, but it doesn't matter. That's what builds it into the future.
Yeah.
So being explicit about that process, that you don't need your hand held by the game. You can go and do what your friends want, and if it isn't perfect, we'll do better next time. Yeah. And that's fine.
Love it. Marcus, any thoughts?
Not really. Just continuing on what Matt is saying here. I mean, I'd rather put less in there than more, and like you said, Matt, just try it. If you screw it up, I mean, you can't really screw it up. Nothing's gonna break if you like do it differently. And
yeah.
Can I give a concrete example?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like something I do in my DCC game that I think like demonstrates that sort of lack of fear around doing this is I get my group to set the DC of a lot of roles. So when somebody says, oh, can I do this? I say, yeah, sure. And then I say to the rest of the group, how difficult do you think this is? And they have to come up with the number. And it doesn't matter if they accidentally set it low or really high. It's them starting to think about that that's important. And that's mostly with a group of new players. And within a few weeks of starting, they were doing this confidently.
Yeah.
They've gained that experience by playing in that way, rather than gaining the experience and then playing that way.
Well, and I'll say this, like, I'll let me step out of host mode for a second. Like, I like play culture will beat game rules every single time. Like people pull games into their table and they play them the way their table plays games. One of the great things about minimalist games is they enter into that space very easily because you're not going to have as many rules pushing back against whatever the table's play culture is. If that play culture is unhealthy, it's always going to be unhealthy. Your game isn't going to fix that. Well, actually, your game, like I will say this, I think playing Matt's games, I think playing sealed library games will make your table a better table, period. Like I will 100% say that confidently. If you play Matt's games, your table will create a healthier play culture. But I think, like, for me, I write maxims in my book, and they're very minimalist. Lots of them are derived from, like, Principia Apocrypha or things like that. But I'm a big fan of saying, here is some of the type of culture we want you to gauge and play as part of text. And sometimes, like, I have a Honey Heist hack called Santa Side Squad, which is about being the North Pole's last best hope to save Christmas. But like, there's only one maxim on each one. And it's like, if you're having, for the players, if you're having fun, you're not doing it wrong is the maximum. And if you're the GM, it's like, if there's not a rule for it, just make something up. And it's just to give the GMs confidence. Like that's the only reason that maxim exists in print, is to tell the GMs, you're not doing this wrong. It's okay. Like if the players are having fun and there's not a rule for it, you can figure it out, and I trust you explicitly as the person who wrote this game to be able to do that. But I think, the more of that you can build into your games. One of the things that didn't make it into Down We Go, that will make it into one of my upcoming publications, there'll be a series of probably 10 to 15 essays in there by people just about play culture and table culture that essentially have nothing to do with the explicit text of the game, but they're things that I think are essential to minimalist play or knowledge that you should have, and I would love a way to communicate them to players who have never played in that style before. Also, I like reading nerdy things that other people I love have to say. So Matt and Andre and Marcus, get ready to write some shit, because y'all are going to be people who get tapped for that at some point in time. But I think you can communicate things that aren't rules to players about play culture also that help navigate a lot of that, the stickiness of that space. We've got a couple more questions I'm going to take in. If you haven't written your question in yet, it may not get answered because we're going to be running short on time here pretty quickly. We've got another panel coming in shortly. What applications or physical processes do you prefer to use for layout? Like, how do y'all do layout when you look at layout?
GIMP.
GIMP.
Yeah, that's it. GIMP and the Google Docs.
There we go. Matt?
Well, when I've got the money, I find someone I really like who I think will get what Sealed Library is about, and then I hire them. That's the way I would like to be able to do it. When I'm doing layout myself, which I don't think I can say is my forte, it's then about getting the aesthetic of the game across. I mostly work in Affinity because those are cheaply available to me, and I'm trying to get something across, no game only vibes at that point, that kind of tells you a little bit about what the game is doing on a budget.
Awesome. This is a longer question, so we may take it in parts. 'Cause I think the reflection on it's very good. It's also in the chat if y'all want to read along with me. So this is from Shane. I think that traditionally we've come to believe that more book is better because it gives more raw materials to create from. But I'm interested in the psychology of emergent and narrative world building, or how the game lives and expands in the GMs and players' heads after consuming the product. Is this a consideration that you include in your design? And if so, are there any specifics you think are useful for helping trigger that creative growth? This came up and down we go because Marcus was doing a thing when we played it, and this goes back to Matt's point on just go play your game with people because they'll notice things. That eventually became a core differentiating part of the system called lore as loot. But Marcus, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you consider the emergent narrative process, and then we can hop around to Andre or Matt too?
Geez, I would actually rather one of you started.
That's fine. I just like hopping around and giving different people a chance to start first. Andre, do you have any thoughts on that, or Matt?
Yeah, I think that's, my answer to that is the Undying Sense. And that's exactly what we try. Like, those concerns are exactly what we try to answer with a product such as the Undying Sense, right? I don't know if everyone here knows what the Undying Sense is, but it's basically what we call hex and screen setting. So it's an RPG setting that is only presented in basically a GM screen that has all the information you need, like tools and tables and information, and then a set of physical hex tiles that you pull from the back as the players explore the setting. So what happens here is that the setting somehow emerges or is formed while you are playing it, while you are exploring it. And so it's chances are that the Undying Sense will never be like even the cartography of the Undying Sense will never be the same for two groups. So that leaves a lot of space for interpretation there and world building there. And the Undying Sense also has a number of locations, right? Adventure locations that the GM is invited to expand upon to their own liking, basically. And we also have like a license, right? A third-party license now, where you can actually expand one of these locations or turn it into a more fleshed out adventure location. So I think that what we try to do with the Undying Sense is precisely that. It's precisely the idea that a setting doesn't come away twice, even in terms of its cartography or its cartographical shape, if I may say. So that's how I would answer this.
Yeah, perfect, Matt.
So I think it's really interesting in Shay's question that we're talking about this as like a forward-moving process, right? Where you digest the game and then you build the world, and then that goes in the player's head, right? And I actually have done a few things with one of which I've published, but one of which I do with my players, where it's much more about looking backwards. So I published a game called Tales by Fireside, where at the beginning of the session, everybody writes down on a post-it what happened last session, like a brief summary of it. Then you choose one of them and you burn all the rest, and that one is canonized as what happened previously in the campaign. Because obviously everybody has slightly different memories of these things, but you create this deliberately written record of what happened, like how the tale of what happened is told by looking backwards. And I also do this as an exercise with my players, and this came out of something a player said to me, where they talked about how in the game, the descriptions I give or other players give really make it come alive in their head. And that came after this session in which the group had fought these giant salamanders. And I said, okay, well, Joe, what color were the salamanders? And all 6 of my players gave a different answer. And then I said, well, okay, what color are we going to say they were so that if these come up again, we know what color they are? And that generated a discussion about amongst the players where they did it. I'd never said what color they were. There was an answer in the book I had, the bestiary I had said what color they were, but I just farmed it out to them in a backwards looking way. So it isn't this like forward moving thing all the time. You can do it afterwards and canonize whatever you want. And it doesn't matter that everybody had a different version at the time. And so I think, that's a deliberate thing in my design process of kind of throwing out, well, what it says in the book may not matter. What we said at the time may not matter. We can change it afterwards to suit our purposes, and that's totally fine.
Love it. I think that's all the questions we've had explicitly come in, other than Clint said some really nice things in chat about Matt, but Matt already responded to them. You should go check out all Matt's stuff also too. You should also go check out Games Omnivorous work. I will say, Matt, you why don't you tell us a little bit about I've got one more thought, but before I share a little bit about that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's coming out recently from Sealed Library and where they can find what y'all are up to?
Sure. So I've actually released 2 games digitally this week, which are available via my itch page, which is sealedlibrary.itch.io. I've released There's Things in Them There Hills, which is a way of generating a deck of random encounters as a collaborative world-building exercise with your players. That works the way real-life rumors work, where people add things to what they've already heard. I won't say more than that, but it's a fun exercise for session 0 where you will build this encounter deck, and it informs the setting and it informs player and character knowledge of that setting. And you need a deck of cards and some Sharpies, and that's it. It's a good time. The other thing is What on the Borderware, which is about deliberately deconstructing respect for the text of an adventure. So you've all played that game, I'm sure, as kids, where you look at a tray of objects for 30 seconds and then you have to list them all, right? And you usually forget some, and occasionally you even invent some. This essentially is doing that with adventure texts. You look at the map for 2 minutes, you stare at it, and then you internalize all the details. Then you close the book and you draw your own map, and that's the map you use. And you do the same with encounters or tables or whatever it is you need to run the game. And that process of interacting with the text, you don't memorize it authentically, but you do internalize it and have your own version of it that I believe is easier to run because you actually remember it and you have the references for it created in your form. And that's all based on doing it with the classic, the Keep on the Borderlands, which becomes the What on the Borderware. But the processes in it would work with any adventure text. As you scale up, it would get really time consuming, but on a short adventure, it's pretty easy.
Andre, same question for you. Tell people a little bit more about where you. Jason really wants you to comment. I don't think Andre did, Jason. That's a good catch. Did you didn't get a chance to talk about what you do for layout or stuff? If you have thoughts on that, Jason would love for you to be able to talk. And I'm sorry that we skipped over you from that.
No, it's fine, because my question is I have no answer to that.
Different
because
stuff all the time.
I know nothing about software. I know nothing about how to do layout or graphic design. We have at Games Omnivorous, we have our in-house designer team, which is a couple that lives in the north of Portugal. They never play the game in their lives. They are not even interested in playing games. They come from the arts scene in Portugal, basically. They have credits under literature, theater, performance, poetry. So they do a lot of stuff for in the art scene in Portugal. They are our in-house designers that do most of the things. And now we also have been doing. We've been working with some other designers, notably Gontijo in Brazil, who did layout for the Haunted Almanac, and for Vaults of Varn, which is coming out next Tuesday. So we have Vaults of Varn Deluxe Edition coming out next Tuesday, and that's also by Guilherme Gontijo. So I apologize. I don't even have
that's
a layout
actually,
software
actually
installed in my computer.
That's actually a great answer as far as resources go, though, because it goes back to what Matt was saying. Thinking outside of just the RPG niche and looking at artists and other people in your community is 100% a way to think about resourcing also, too. So don't be afraid to do that. But you just mentioned Vaults of Varn. You also have Frontier Scum coming out this week. Tell people a little bit more about Games Omnivorous and the great things y'all have coming up.
Thank you. So you can check us out at gamesomnivorous.com. We just did fulfillment for Mouse Reader. We've been doing that for the past. We did that. Last 2 months were basically all about Mouse Reader and doing the Kickstarter fulfillment, and then the general sale launch. And next week we are releasing Vaults of Varn Deluxe Edition, which is, if anyone knows Vaults of Varn is a game that already exists in the format of 3 zines, and now it's getting a deluxe treatment, if I may say so. So Gontijo did the layout, and it's a hardback. It's a 170-page hardback that with lots of new art, exclusive content. So that's coming out, as well as Frontier Scum, which is a game by Carl Druid, which some of you may know from. He won Annies with Morkborg digital content for Morkborg, and it's his first game, I believe, proper, and it's acid Western role-playing game, beautifully laid out. It's just a fantastic piece of art, in my opinion. Like, he did such a great job with that book. I had, my intervention was limited to being the publisher and just giving some suggestions, but it's like I was in awe with that work, and I think you all gonna like it. And we also going to have a reprint of the Haunted Almanac by Nate Stream, who the book has been sold out for the past 6 months or so. So a reprint is also being released on Tuesday. And right after that, we move on to the Undying Sands and Bottled Sea Kickstarter fulfillment. So it's going to be a busy month ahead.
Awesome. And I need more people to buy Games Omnivorous games so that we can keep them in print more regularly also, too. Because one of the things I love about them, they'll do really tight print runs. You always have some extra stock, but people love them, so they go quickly. So people need to support them more so we can make sure we do bigger print runs in the future. Very excited about all those books. We got to play Frontier Scum. I'm a big Vaults of Varn fan, but we got to play Frontier Scum here a couple weeks ago on stream and talk about some maximum minimalism, but also talk about some implied world building through bizarre ads that get placed in the middle of the RPG book also, too. Some of the things that Carl did with art for that are just tremendous. So please check it out as it goes live. Marcus, if people want to find out more about you, your work, or any upcoming projects you have, where would they go?
Twitter, Apes of Wrath _RPG. I'm on Itch as well, and I'm on DriveThruRPG, Apes of Wrath. And make sure to check out Down We Go and sign up for a late pledge. Yeah, you can. Late pledges are actually open through the end of EFCon. We'll probably leave them open on Monday also too. But you can go to ttrpg.link /DWG live to go check that out. And see some of that work also too. Tremendous work by a global team. Marcus's voice behind all of that also though too. It's been a pleasure to develop that. It's been a pleasure to be here with everybody today. Also, don't forget to check out Arc by Mamados. The Arc Ventures, which were originally only available digitally, are now available on Exalted Funeral, who is the host of this convention that we're at. If you want to join us here live in the convention space, you can go to ttrpg.link /EF
Con 22 to get tickets. We will be adding people throughout the course of the day. We do have to manually add people. This is our first time doing an online con. Not everything is perfect. We're learning a lot as we go, but it's been a great event so far. We've got games going all day long. We'll have the main stage stuff going out free on our stream, though. So in about 30 minutes, I'm sitting down with Chris Bissett, Jason Cordova, and Zedek Su to talk about adventure design and what goes into making great adventures. Some of my favorite designers, and specifically adventure designers, are there. One of the things that kept on striking me, that I don't think I ever thought about to this, and it may be because of the group that's here, but one of my favorite things about minimalist games is the way that I've seen it kind of form better egalitarianism at the table and get tables talking with each other. Because when not everything is nailed down, people start to ask those questions. And if you have a healthy table culture, people will start to do those things. It's one of the reasons Matt's tech specifically helps draw that out of a table. Sitting down and playing games omnivorous stuff, as well as the communal way in which it's built, is done, and it's baked into the way that we built Down We Go, also too, as a part of a ongoing conversation between Marcus and I, the tensions there, and then the rest of the design community that came in to help build that game. So it's something that I've seen a lot of, and I do think it might be one of the secret reasons why I love minimalist design in the RPG space, is that it leaves an openness for us to figure that stuff out. And I want to thank you all for coming and kind of showcasing some of that in your own work today, also in the way that y'all each conscientiously build things. I know that Colin did have a question that we're not going to have time to talk about because I need at least a 30-minute break, which isn't even 30 minutes because I'm going to get up, walk around a little bit, come back down, sit down, and get ready to stream the next thing before that we go. But that's, what other hobbies do you have? Here's the great thing. I know that Matt's got a day of gardening today. Andre's on vacation, and Marcus has other stuff going on too. But y'all feel free, hang out, talk and gather, even as the next panel starts. It'll be in the same room. But if y'all want to go out and just talk outside, grab some space in the trading post, or go over to the mess hall and sit down and talk about some of these things, you're absolutely welcome to. Would love that. But let's everybody hit F to throw some confetti in the air, or type an emoji into the chat to be the equivalent of applause at the end of the session. Yay, there we go. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks each of you for the work that you do. I'm so excited and can't wait for the next session we have here at Exalted Funeral Con 2022. We'll see